I noticed it first because the air in the kitchen felt cooler than the rest of the apartment, even though the heat had been running all morning. It wasn't cold exactly, just a thin difference, like standing near an open window that isn't actually open. I stood there longer than I needed to, holding my coffee, watching the steam thin out faster than usual. On the table was a small box wrapped in off-white paper. It hadn't been there when I woke up. I was sure of that. I'd come in earlier to rinse my mug, and the table had been clear except for the placemat I never moved. The box sat centered now, square with the table edge, the paper folded tight at the corners. No ribbon, no writing. I didn't touch it at first. I watched the light from the window creep across the surface as the morning went on, slow enough that it was hard to tell if it was moving at all. The paper had a faint texture, almost fabric-like, and one corner was dented inward, as if it had been set down carefully and then adjusted. I tried to remember if I'd ordered something. The thought came and went without settling. It felt easier to stand there than to think it through. Outside, a car passed, tires humming on damp pavement. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed once and then stopped. The clock on the stove ticked, steady and unhelpful. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and something sweeter underneath, though I hadn't baked or cooked anything that morning. Eventually, I set the mug down and rested my fingers on the edge of the box. The paper was cool, not cold enough to surprise me, but cooler than the room. When I pressed lightly, I could feel something firm inside, not shifting. I slid the box closer and peeled back one edge of the paper, careful not to tear it. The sound was soft, almost polite. Inside was a smaller box, white, unmarked. I lifted the lid. There were chocolates inside, dark ones arranged in 2 neat rows, each piece shaped slightly differently. No brand name, no label, just the faint sheen on the surface and a smell that was richer than anything I'd bought recently. I knew those chocolates. I hadn't thought about them in years, not directly. They were from a small place she used to like, a shop we'd found by accident when we were still learning each other's habits. They didn't ship, they didn't advertise. They closed the year after she died. I stood there looking down at them, waiting for the recognition to fade into something reasonable. It didn't. The first year it happened, I'd laughed. That year, it had been a bouquet of white flowers left near my mailbox downstairs, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. No card, no return information. I'd assumed a neighbor had made a mistake, or that someone in the building had a sense of humor they'd regret once they realized the date. I left them by the curb when they started to wilt. The second year, it was a scarf. Folded neatly, soft gray wool, the exact shade she used to wear when it snowed. That time, I felt a small, sharp annoyance more than anything else. I told myself it was coincidence layered on top of grief, that my mind was too eager to connect patterns that weren't there. The third year, it was a book, a used paperback, dog-eared in places I remembered. I didn't open it. I put it on the shelf and told myself it was easier not to think about how unlikely it was. After that, I stopped trying to explain it. Every February, on the same day, something arrived. Always simple, always familiar, never accompanied by anything that asked for a response. The timing was precise without being dramatic. Sometimes early in the morning, sometimes late afternoon. Once, just after dusk, when the light outside had gone flat and colorless. I never saw who brought them. I never mentioned it to anyone, not because I thought they wouldn't believe me, but because I didn't want the questions. The moment you say something out loud, it changes shape. It becomes something you have to manage. I carried the chocolates to the counter and stood there, unsure what to do next. The kitchen felt quieter than it should have. Not silent exactly, just subdued, as if the sounds had been turned down a notch. I picked one up and turned it over in my fingers. There was a faint mark on the bottom, a swirl where it had been set on a tray to cool. I remembered her telling me once that you could tell if they were fresh by the way they broke, clean and sharp, not crumbly. I set it back without tasting it. The day went on around the box. I answered emails. I washed a few dishes that hadn't needed washing. The light shifted, warming briefly in the afternoon before dulling again. The chocolates stayed where they were, untouched, their smell faint but persistent. By evening, the apartment had cooled enough that I put on a sweater. The heat kicked on, rattled for a moment, then settled. I sat at the table with the box between my hands and tried to think about her without letting my mind wander too far. She died in late winter, a short illness that moved faster than anyone expected. Hospital rooms that always smelled too clean, the way time stretched and collapsed at the same time. I remembered the sound of her voice more than anything else, steady even when she was tired. We'd never been sentimental about holidays. Valentine's Day had been an excuse for takeout and an early night. Once she'd brought home those chocolates and said, almost apologetically, that she liked them because they didn't try too hard. I lifted the lid again and chose one at random. It broke cleanly when I bit into it. The filling was smooth, not overly sweet, with a hint of something bitter underneath. It tasted exactly as I remembered. I ate another, slower this time, waiting for the flavor to change, to disappoint me. It didn't. When I finished the second one, I felt a small, unexpected tightening in my chest. Not pain exactly, but pressure. I closed the box and pushed it away. That night I slept poorly. Not because of dreams, but because I kept waking up, aware of the room in a way that felt unfinished. The dark was thicker than usual, the air cool against my face. At one point I thought I could smell the chocolates again, stronger than before, but when I turned my head, the scent thinned out and disappeared. In the morning, the box was gone. The space on the counter was empty, clean, no smudge, no paper. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the spot where it had been. I checked the refrigerator, the cabinets, the trash. Nothing. I told myself I must have moved it without thinking. The explanation didn't stick, but I held on to it anyway. Over the next few days, small things felt off in ways I couldn't quite describe. The apartment seemed to cool faster at night. Sounds from outside felt closer then farther away, without any change I could point to. Once, while brushing my teeth, I caught the faint smell of wool, clean and dry, and then it was gone. On February 15th, there was another package. This one was larger, heavier. It sat near the mailbox again, wrapped in the same off-white paper. I carried it upstairs, my arms straining slightly with the weight. Inside was a ceramic bowl, deep blue, with a thin crack along the rim that had been filled and glazed over. It was hers. She dropped it years ago, laughed and said it gave the bowl character. We'd kept it anyway, using it for fruit until the crack widened enough to worry her. She'd thrown it out herself, insisting it wasn't worth the risk. I ran my thumb over the repaired line. The glaze was smooth, seamless. I didn't eat anything from that bowl. I set it on the counter and left it there. When I woke the next morning, it was still there, exactly where I'd put it. That was when the waiting started. I began to measure time by the distance between these moments. I stopped being surprised by the arrivals and started noticing the gaps around them. The way the apartment felt just before something appeared, the slight cooling of the air, the sense of pause, like the world holding still for half a breath. I didn't mark the dates anymore. I didn't need to. This year, the package arrived later than usual. Evening had already settled in, the light outside thin and gray. I was sitting at the table, reading without really absorbing the words, when I noticed the air shift. The smell came first, faint and sweet. The box was on the table. I hadn't heard anything. I hadn't moved. Inside was a small potted plant. A simple one, green leaves edged with pale veins. The soil was dark and damp, freshly watered. When I leaned closer, I could smell earth, rich and alive. She'd kept plants like this on the windowsill, talking to them under her breath while she trimmed dead leaves. After she died, they'd all withered within weeks, no matter how carefully I followed her routines. I set the plant by the window and watched it for a long time. The leaves were still. The room was quiet. My reflection in the glass looked tired, older than I remembered feeling. That night, I woke just before dawn. The apartment was cold, the air heavy against my skin. From the other room, I could smell damp soil again, stronger than before. When I reached the window, the plant's leaves were glossy with moisture. Tiny beads of water clung to the edges, catching the first light of morning. I hadn't watered it. I stood there, listening to the faint hum of the city waking up, and realized that whatever had been waiting all these years was no longer content to leave things behind and disappear. If you enjoy slow, unsettling horror stories, consider liking the video and subscribing. It always starts with the radiator. Not the sound of it turning on, that would be too obvious, but the moment right before, when the apartment is perfectly still and the metal hasn't decided yet whether to expand or stay quiet. That pause has a texture to it, a held breath. I notice it every year now. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, watching the faint glow of streetlight bleed through the blinds. The light never reaches the floor evenly. It breaks into thin stripes that stop just short of the bed. I'd been awake for a while, listening to the building settle, the distant hum of traffic thinning as the night moved on. February nights here are dry. The air feels lighter, cooler, like it doesn't want to linger. I remember thinking my throat felt scratchy and making a note to get water in a minute. I didn't move. That was when I heard him say my name. Not loudly, not urgently, just the way he used to when he was in the other room and needed to check if I was still awake. The sound came from my left, close enough that I could picture the exact place he would have been standing, leaning slightly against the counter, weight on one foot. I didn't turn my head. My first thought was that I'd imagined it, not in a dramatic way, more like noticing a familiar smell and then realizing it isn't really there. The brain does that sometimes when it's tired. It fills in gaps. I waited for it to repeat. It didn't. The radiator clicked then, a single sharp sound, and heat began to creep through the pipes. I lay there until my breathing slowed back down, until the moment passed and became something I could file away. The next morning, I didn't think about it at all. I went to work. I stood in line for coffee. I answered emails and nodded at the right times. The day moved forward in its usual unremarkable way. By evening, the night before had thinned into something flat and harmless. It wasn't until a week later, when the date came back around, that I noticed the pattern. Valentine's Day had never meant much to me after he died. The first year, I avoided it out of habit more than pain. The second year, I forgot it was coming until a coworker mentioned dinner plans. By the third, it was just another day with more red in store windows. That night, I went to bed early. The apartment was quiet in the way it gets after 10, when the neighbors settle in and the building seems to pull inward. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling fan, not moving, listening to the faint electrical buzz that meant it was on its lowest setting. I wasn't thinking about him, not consciously. When the voice came, it felt closer than before. "Hey," he said. Just that. A single word. Calm. Familiar. The tone he used when he didn't want to startle me. My heart rate didn't spike. There was no rush of panic. What I felt instead was confusion, clean and sharp. I sat up. The room looked exactly the same shadows, the same light slipping under the bedroom door from the hallway. The fan continued its slow rotation, the air brushing my skin with each pass. I said his name out loud. The sound of my own voice felt strange, too loud in the quiet room. Nothing answered. I waited. counting the seconds without meaning to. 10, 20, 30. Eventually, I lay back down. The next day, I told myself a story that fit. Stress, sleep deprivation, the mind replaying old recordings at inconvenient times. I'd read about things like that. It was common enough to feel boring once you put a name to it. What I didn't do was check the date. The third time happened a year later. By then, I'd moved to a different apartment across town. New street, new routine. I told myself that whatever pattern I thought I'd noticed wouldn't survive the change. Brains love to impose order where none exists. That night, I stayed up later than usual, scrolling through my phone until my eyes hurt. The apartment felt colder than it should have, despite the heat. I pulled the blanket higher and turned onto my side, facing the window. Outside, a bus sighed at the stoplight, then moved on. Somewhere above me, someone walked across their living room, the sound muffled and distant. I was just starting to drift when I heard him speak again. This time, he said my name twice. The sound didn't come from any one direction. It felt closer to my head than the room, as if it were being placed directly into the space between thoughts. The cadence was unmistakable, the small pause between the syllables, the way his voice dipped at the end. I sat up so fast the blanket slid to the floor. My mouth was dry. My hands felt cold against my thighs. I listened, hard, straining for any sign that this was something external, someone outside, a television through the wall, a radio left on by mistake. There was nothing. I didn't sleep after that. I lay there until morning, watching the light change, telling myself over and over that if it didn't happen again, it didn't mean anything. It didn't happen again. Not that year. I started paying attention after that, though I didn't admit it to myself. I kept mental notes I pretended were casual observations. The way the apartment felt at night in mid-February, the quality of the silence, the way my thoughts slowed, as if something were waiting for me to stop moving. I didn't hear him every year. That was almost worse. Some years the night passed without incident. I would lie awake, tense, waiting for a sound that never came. By morning, I'd feel foolish, embarrassed by my own anticipation. Other years, it happened once, always on the same night, never during the day, never when anyone else was around. I tried recording the room one year, just my phone on the nightstand, screen dark, microphone open. I told myself it was for peace of mind, something objective, something to prove to myself that nothing was happening. That night, I heard him say my name soft and clear. In the morning, the recording was silent. No distortion, no gaps, just the faint background hum of the apartment. My own breathing, slow and even. I stopped trying to capture it after that. What changed wasn't the voice. It was me. The first few times I felt startled, then confused. After that, wary. Eventually, something like expectation settled in. Not hope, not fear, just readiness. I noticed how carefully he spoke. He never raised his voice, never sounded distressed. He didn't ask questions or say anything that required a response. Most of the time, it was just my name. Once it was, "You still up?" That was the year I almost answered. I lay there, staring into the dark, the words hovering on my tongue. For a moment, it felt normal to imagine replying, to imagine the conversation continuing the way it used to, unremarkable and gentle. I didn't speak. The voice didn't repeat itself. After that, I stopped trying to deny what was happening, not in a dramatic, acceptance-filled way, more like acknowledging a weather pattern you can't control. It comes, it goes, you adjust. I planned my Valentine's nights carefully. No late dinners, no sleepovers. I stayed home, alone, with the lights low. I didn't drink. I didn't distract myself too much. I wanted to be present without inviting anything. The apartment always felt different on those nights. The air heavier, sounds slightly dulled, as if padded. Time stretched in small, uncomfortable ways. Minutes felt longer than they should have. When the voice came, it was never sudden anymore. There was always a lead-up, a stillness, a sense of waiting. Last year, it happened later than usual. I'd almost convinced myself it wouldn't come at all. The clock read just past 2. I was lying on my back, eyes closed, listening to the faint hiss of the radiator, feeling foolish and relieved at the same time. That was when he spoke. "I found you," he said. The words were quiet, almost thoughtful, not threatening, not emotional, just a statement. I opened my eyes. The room looked unchanged. The ceiling fan was still. The shadows were where they should have been. My heart was beating faster than usual, but not wildly. "I'm here," he added. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I lay there, breathing shallowly, aware of every sensation in my body, the cool air on my face, the warmth under the blankets, the steady pressure of the mattress beneath me. Nothing else happened. In the morning, the feeling lingered longer than it ever had before, a sense of something unresolved. I went through the day, distracted, my thoughts circling back to the words, despite my efforts. That night, I checked the calendar. Valentine's Day had passed. It's been a year since then. Tonight, the apartment is quiet again. The radiator hasn't clicked yet. The air feels lighter than it should, like it's thinning out. I'm lying in bed, eyes open, waiting. Not because I want to hear him, but because I've started to understand that whatever voice reaches me on this night doesn't need my permission anymore.